Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Barnardos Working Together Online webinar. We're so delighted that so many of you could join us today for this important webinar because, like many of you, Barnardos did a lot of work online during the COVID period, and we thought it was really important that we would evaluate that work, which we have done thanks to the funding of Rethink Ireland. And we've also developed a best practice framework following that evaluation, both of which will be available on our website after this event, which you're welcome to look at, and hopefully you'll find it interesting. We're also going to hear from parents and children today about how they found working with us online. And I would just like to really, as I said, thank Rethink Ireland who funded this work. So we wouldn't have been able to do the evaluation or the framework without their support. So as you can see in front of you there, we have a very interesting afternoon. And we hope that you will stay with us, and we'd really encourage you as well to join the conversation through using the hashtag if you have something you think the world should hear about this. So that'd be great. So just to start the afternoon, I'm going to introduce now with pleasure our keynote speaker, who is Dr. Amanda Taylor-Beswick from the University of Cumbria. So welcome, Amanda. We're delighted to have you with us. Amanda started her career as a social worker, and she is now a social worker educator, which we know is a really important role. And also, particularly in the age that we're in, you specialise in the area of digital education, which is fantastic. And you've also been the founding director of the Centre for Digital Transformation. And very impressively, you've got a lot of awards and nominations for awards. And particularly one which I thought was really interesting is the 2018 recommendation as part of top business women in technology. So I think it's really impressive that someone who's a social work background has made that journey. So listen, well done to you. And over to you now for your presentation.
Brilliant, thank you. I appreciate that. Very warm introduction. So it's obviously a delight to be asked to keynote. It's something so significant in terms of the work, but also in terms of the organisation. And as Suzanne said, I would definitely encourage you to read this evaluation and the practice guidance. I read it over the weekend in detail and again this morning, and I was super excited as some of the feedback in the research talks about that Barnardos colleagues are excited about taking blended type learning forward, and that certainly comes out and it certainly leaves you with that sense that there is something to be excited about here. So yes, I'm coming in from the University of Cumbria this morning, or this afternoon it is actually now. In the Lancaster campus, we have campuses dotted all over the place, but this morning I'm at Lancaster campus, so it's an absolute pleasure to be coming. And you can hear from my accent, I am not local to Lancaster, so I feel in very good company in Ireland this morning. So as just mentioned, I'm the founding director of the Centre for Digital Transformation here in the University of Cumbria. How did I get from being a psychiatric social worker and a social worker for deaf children and their families to here? It was an interesting journey, and it really began when I decided to move to England to do my PhD in 2007 and forgot to go home. I did go home recently for 4 years, about 20 weeks before the pandemic was a thing. They appointed me at Queen's University Belfast for my digital expertise. And 20 weeks later, we were full throw in the middle of a pandemic, which required a lot of digital expertise. So it took me quite a long, it was a good appointment for them. It was an interesting exercise for me because everything I had hoped for in social sciences came towards us like a freight train. I have just added various links to my kind of profile, ways for people to connect with me now and after this session. Should you wish any resources I might mention, please do kind of be in touch, knock my screen anytime you like. But again, my interests in digital and social work and social care really did start when I made that move to the University of Central Lancashire in 2007. I was trying to stay connected to my community and my culture and people, and just have a sense of self in a place whilst only maybe 12 miles across the RAC was very unfamiliar to me in terms of how people were and the ways that they behaved in relation to and different to how I'd experienced it at home in Ireland. And I just immediately saw the connection between how the world was evolving in a digital sense, in a technology sense, and the relationship between that and me educating social work students for practice in that type of landscape. So I'll probably mention some of that as I go through. And a part of this talk for me is really reflecting on kind of this idea of, I've been spending a lot of time throughout the pandemic giving talks about digital, because I guess I've been pestering my profession for years and years to think about digital as related to social work and social care. And it was hard to see that connection all of the time until the pandemic, of course, hit. And then we really did need to lean into what was a very troublesome space for social scientists, where we work with people and not computers. There's a real distinction in our narrative around that, but we very much did have to lean into that sort of troublesome space, that liminality, and really test and learn as it went along. And I think this is where this evaluation is really important, and also it's a fabulous reflective piece, regardless of the whole kind of the reason why that it's come to pass kind of thing. It really shows how social scientists, as practitioners, are really reflecting on what happened and where they need to go forward post sort of the pandemic. So I thought it was really interesting when I was thinking about this. What should I think about here? And it just really struck with me that you, as an organisation, had really leaned into that liminality, that troublesome space, a space that's not comfortable for us as social scientists, and embraced it and left us with something, a real legacy piece to think about. So just my own reflections, really, the language of the virus, the virus more broadly, what happened to us in terms of this crisis that we entered into almost in lots of ways overnight, and how that has changed everything about our social world, really, in lots of different ways. Whilst we rely very heavily on proximal practice, that was not particularly always mediated through a screen. We may have mediated through the telephone and things like that, but more often than not, we were out in communities, in people's homes, in very physical proximity to other people. But the virus has changed everything. I think there is the notion of normal or going back to normal. We can disabuse ourselves of that, really, because everything kind of changed. We've got new words. How many times did anybody in this call was it reflected back to them? You're on mute. The chat function. We're going to talk about automated attendance, camera etiquette, social distancing, COVID safe. Everything that kind of happened in that time really shifted the world in lots of ways, very, very unusual and unfamiliar ways for all of us who are very people-orientated practitioners. Some of the work that's just relating to your children's orientation that I got involved in very early in the pandemic, not only were educators calling on me to say, you need help, what are we going to do about this? How do we use technologies? How do we engage students through a screen? Also people in community interest companies, charities, people out on the field were getting in touch to say, can you help with this? And one particular piece of work, and I've put a slide at the end, you can have these slides as well, they're open access, and put lots of resources and links that connect into the evaluation work, actually, was a piece of work I did with an organisation called New Beginnings, and that is an organisation in Stockport near Manchester. An academic called Yadviga Lee basically has translated her PhD into this piece of work, which is Stockport New Beginnings, and it's new beginnings for families around parents' choices around children getting into care. And they work with children at that point where they're in proceedings and there's care decisions being made. And it's a 6 months program, and it's all obviously in a community centre right in the middle of Stockport, and it's all very physical. It all relies very much on proximity. And overnight, we applied for a fund. We got data, we got phones, iPads for the children who needed to be homeschooled and they didn't have that facility. And the blog that I've linked in the resources here just shows how much of a difference, and which was very much reflected in your evaluation and your practice guidance, your best practice guidance for digital going forward, is how that there were elements of digital that really supported this piece of work, and people were surprised by that. And pleased by that, and I think it says in the evaluation that you're excited about going forward. I think when I read things like this and your evaluation and your practice guidance, absolutely we should be, and we've really located ourselves in that space as social scientists and working alongside computer scientists in terms of the methods that we'll use going forward. Some of the other work I was doing at that time, I had lots of research projects going on as a part of my work at Queen's. This one in particular was with young people in Newham, and we were looking at knife crime, and we were looking at activism as a mental health intervention. around well-being. The pandemic hit, we still felt it was important to carry on with that work. As a social worker, I never thought that I would have to build a metaverse. This on screen is a metaverse. And within the metaverse are all the people, including my co-researcher, who is in the very left-hand screen with the black jacket on. And Ishrat is a young person in Newham. She was working on the project with me, and we very much embrace the metaverse, embrace working in the metaverse. So basically, we have never met in a sort of more physical sense, but we have met lots online, and we work with the company to build this and complete the whole piece of research online. So I never imagined that I would have to do that as part of my academic work, and it was a huge learning curve. And I noticed throughout the evaluation that you talk about the learning curve that you were all on as an organisation, which was really interesting to me. And it just, what really stuck out was the world was on a learning curve. It wasn't just one particular grouping of people. We were all on this learning curve together. And the lovely thing is that we're now in this space of reflection where we're thinking about how do we want to take control of that going forward. As again, a large proportion of my time was spent thinking about pre-pandemic social work, pandemic social work, and post-pandemic social work within the context more broadly, because my interest is so any kind of digital where the digital intersects with any sort of social intersection, and that's been my interest for a while now. Thinking about that, I was trying to get a frame for it and understand and help to articulate and communicate to colleagues and to understand it better myself. And how do we go forward after this event? People like me have been asking for digital social work or social work and technologies type practices for a very long time, and here we were presented with this opportunity, but it was a very sort of crisis kind of response to that. So I spent a lot of time doing talks like this one, and that was my framing of it: pre-pandemic, pandemic, and post-pandemic social work and social care. And those resources are all online should you wish to have a look at any of those, if they would be helpful. I think for me, thinking back about this, social work and social care has always been a response to the industrial revolutions. I think the difference between the earlier revolutions and this one was the rapidity and the scale of change, and I think that continues to be the case. The practice landscape has always evolved. We are always having to upskill and reskill and think about how our practice might fit the landscape in which we work going forward, fit people in terms of how people are developing, how they're communicating in the world, how they're accessing the world. There's so many aspects to this. And again, this is where your evaluation and report just goes into its own. You've taken, you've drawn out all those intricacies of the social world, this idea of, the new normal almost, and you're really, teasing out the tensions, teasing out the possibilities going forward. But this, as I say, we're now moving into the fifth industrial revolution, but the thing for me that remains the same is the professional task. So what we do as social scientists remains the same. We work with complexity, uncertainty, risk, and also we bring creativity to that space. And again, that's very much reflected in some of the qualitative statements throughout this piece of work, where you can see that people have really thought hard about how they develop their practice. In a crisis, it was a crisis response, but still they were able to really work hard to engage people in mediated spaces, something that was fairly unfamiliar to us all. So I talk about now we're into the fifth industrial revolution. What might that mean? And again, what the practice guidance is really helping us and supporting us to do is to think about how are we going to navigate this space when we're working with people. And particularly, I love some of the qualitative stuff around the young people that very much is saying some people choose and appreciate the mediated space in terms of how they communicate and engage with their worker, and vice versa. There's so many benefits, and it still requires a professional criticality about choices and platforms and all those various things. But what really stands out in this evaluation is how that you wrangle with all those and how you're positioning yourself as an organisation and helping all of the rest of us as a professional community to position ourselves in terms of how we proceed with our practices, how we're developing our practices. Just to mention that, going back, to how I ended up in this space and interested here, I am not the only social worker, social scientist to be interested in technologies. If you look at the slide that's on the screen now, you'll see the first conference from technology and social worker and social scientists was in 1987. I'm still in contact and still I'm very closely mentored by a wonderful group of people, social workers through and through, who developed this literature base which is substantial and goes back, it precedes 1987. In fact, you can take it right back to 1917, if I'm honest, and I have a slide about that where Mary Richmond was encouraging social workers to use the telephone. And I mean, that was that. You're probably all too young to remember this, but it was a thing that sort of sat at a podium in my house anyway, in the hallway when we first got it. And you lifted a receiver and then you put your finger in this dial and you sort of went around and around and you had to wait till the number went back till you got your new number. You're probably all way too young to remember that. But in 1917, very, very famous social worker encouraging us to use technologies in our practice. So there's a very long history and a substantial literature base that still continues today. You'll see there's a journal that is associated with HOSIDA. HOSIDA is still there, an international grouping of us that think about, as it says here, technology to support humanity. So we've been thinking about that while we're unpacking the intricacies of that around ethics and tensions and law and data protection and all those sorts of things. We've also, as they said back in the conference in 1987, they were convinced of the value of technology for the future of human services. And they were met with a lot of resistance. And throughout my career, until I got to the pandemic, really, I understood that resistance. Again, people saying I came to social work, social care to work with people, not machines. And that's not to say the procurement of technologies has not been problematic, because it has in our discipline for all sorts of reasons. But I think we are here in a different kind of space where we're thinking about, as you have very clearly demonstrated through this work, how do we go forward? How do we go forward in this emergent social world that, with all its complexities that are being highlighted to us in different ways? The business model that this was built on was very much about clicks and engagement and communication, and sometimes it services really well and sometimes it doesn't. And that's for us, again, as social scientists, to think out together as a grouping, as our colleagues at Barnardos have very, very clearly shown, because of how the world is changing and shifting. And it won't be long before most of us, I'd imagine, will be working alongside a humanoid. And we have to kind of appreciate that's how quickly it would go. And I remember showing slides like this pre the pandemic and people thinking I had completely lost my mind, that I might be working with a humanoid. And I was quite excited about that because, for all sorts of reasons that I'll not go into now. But now I think if I suggest that, people are still finding that hard to believe and see. But I would imagine, Sophia being one of the first examples of that. She's our daughter as well. You may have come across it, that her daughter was invited to the UK government to give evidence recently and fell asleep in the committee that she was invited to. You might want to have a look at that online. It was quite amusing in lots of different ways, really. And it was for all sorts of reasons that we were working in this sort of digital space, this digital social work, social care, social world intersection. And actually a week before the pandemic hit, a group of colleagues, Baswa, Sky, and myself as the academic consultant had published digital capabilities for social workers, another document you might want to have a look at alongside the work that you've produced. Again, it's a collection of works that people have to draw on, but we launched this the week before the pandemic struck, and the access in that week was very limited. And when the pandemic struck, of course, that was exacerbated really, but people were really trying to figure out ways through the problems that we were experiencing. And those problems were basically prefix everything, familiar things that we work with as social scientists, social workers, all the problems of the social world, prefixing that with digital. And I think what we saw throughout the pandemic very acutely was things like digital disadvantage, digital poverty, digital exclusion, issues with digital rights and exploitation. Digital child sexual abuse was a 700% increase in the UK. So it's just basically when we think about anything in terms of our practice going forward, it's just prefixing that with the digital to see that we are really tuned into that space and looking at that digital aspect. Every aspect of the world has a digital feature, and it's it's worthwhile considering how do we go about our assessments, like is explained in your practice guidance. What are the kinds of things that we need to, when we're tuning into the work, that we really need to think and drill down into. And I think in lots of ways that's where the pandemic really highlighted and heightened our awareness and became we became more acutely aware of how the digital is shifting and changing the world, and it became, I think, much more explicit rather than being something implicit sort of in our day-to-day existence. It became more clear the problems with that world. It was some of that reason when I did my PhD back in 2014, where I was thinking about my responsibility to all of my colleagues who would go into frontline practice, beginning with social work students. And I did examine sort of the contribution of social work education to the digital professionalism of students at that time. And what I found very clearly was that we weren't preparing them in social work academia well enough for practice in a digital world. And whilst it was a very different world at that time in terms of the digital, though the findings from this work I continue to publish from this, and put another paper out in 2022 when I sort of moved over from my more kind of purely social work academic role into this founding directorship at looking at digital transformation right across an organisation. And that was a very kind of telling piece of work for me, because what I kind of found wasn't that I expected that as time would go on, that the errors that we can find ourselves, or the problems we can find ourselves in relation to digital practices and digital professionalism, still continue to happen. So it's really important that we do access and evaluate our practice, and we do support and help each other in the way that Barnardos Ireland have shown, to how do we progress, what are the kinds of things that we progress. And looking back on your practices, we fundamentally know that social workers is key to that, and they have done this large scale and give us a real gift in terms of the findings of this work. They have very much, as I say here, leaned into the liminality to review individual, organisational, digital knowledge, skills and practices and policies. They have, as I say here as well, excuse me, really interrogated these intersections, and you'll read that right through when you look at their themes, the themes of the report. You know, what are the current potentialities and pearls for practitioners, for organisations, for social care professionals, for people and societies, and how do we proceed from that? How do we go forward? They have really given us a context in which to, ground ourselves in their experiences of the pandemic and their learning from practice in the pandemic. It is a fabulous, I can't say it's enough, it's a fantastic piece of work. They've also teased out, ideas around ethics, rights and values, which is another whole complexity around this. So we take our professional value base and our ethics and our commitment to people's rights, hard-won, fought human rights. And I did put a paper out with one of the founders of Hasida at the very start of the pandemic, and I think I've linked it into the slides, and if I haven't, if you would like that, I can send that to you. That really teases out the importance of us really tuning into people's rights around digital, the values around digital ethics. And again, I've put some resources and links on there if you want to have a look at that. Very much orientated towards children's services and AI and algorithms. That's the slide I probably should have put in earlier when I talked about Mary Richmond in 1917, who was noting the significance of using the telephone in social work practice. And I bet if I had we had this conversation pre the pandemic, that was very much embedded into kind of what we do and who we are. But you lift the telephone most times if that's possible for people. There are people who can't do that, but for people who could, they would lift the telephone and make calls, and we had that really embedded. I think at some point, the technologies that we're thinking and talking about today will become so embedded that we won't have to think about it. It'll be a part of kind of what we do and our choices. When Barnardos are talking about blended in their approach, they'll have that the toolbox that we talk about has shifted and changed quite dramatically, and has given us a whole range of things where people say that actually they want that flexibility. We're all growing up in an Amazon, Netflix, seamless kind of on-demand type society now, and that's what people will seek from their in their practice experiences. Our GPs are moving down to more sort of digital practices. We are seeing it in lots of disciplines outside of our own. There was remote surgery going on all over the world, gallbladders being removed by a surgeon who's in America, and the gallbladder and the person is in France. There are all sorts of things happening in the world that in one way are exciting, in other ways completely alien and not to what we would have, if somebody would have explained that to us kind of, 5-10 years ago, would have thought, no, that's way too dangerous. But there are lots of different professions and professional groupings that are kind of being replaced by technologies as well. the statistic on social sciences and social care workers there, that's not going to happen. That's a kind of impossibility for a lot of us in the work that we do, because it is so proximal, it is so intimate, and it requires various senses that you can only really get when you're in person, in environment. So lots of us to think about. Another paper that we've just brought out recently, this is with my colleague, Amanda MacDonald at Queen's University in Belfast, and a couple of colleagues in Sydney, and we were trying to really think about not just the technological side of the digital shift as related to social work and social care, but also to think about how do we conceptualize people within this new kind of environment we're working. Not let the people part kind of slip from us and start to do technologies to them kind of thing, to really hold on to that notion of human development and all the various layers that make up a person and a person's existence in the world. And this paper is open access, and again, I've linked it, and you can have access to that. And if there's any problems with that, please do reach out, and I'll get you a copy of that. But we call this the digital, the 3 R's, basically, where we look at digital rights, digital relationality, and digital resilience. We looked at it in the context of children and out-of-home care. The feedback that we have had, that whilst it's really helpful for assessment, so people are using it as an assessment tool, and we're about to digitize this so that it'll be very interactive and you can use it as an assessment tool. But basically what the feedback we've had from the paper across the profession is that this is really helpful to understanding people in context, and we've taken the person in environment conceptualization and translated that in terms of people in reality. And the reason we've done that is because a lot of people will talk about this notion of IRL, in real life. So I am very much we're not together in a kind of more proximal way or a physical way. We can't touch each other right now, but we're very much in person. We're very much in real life. So we've taken that, you have probably heard it at university, person and environment, and we've just shifted that a tiny bit to think about people in reality, so person in reality, contact in reality, and that's not contact solely within foster and care circumstances, that's contact with people more broadly. We've drawn on Gillian Isaac's work around mediated spaces and how this kind of work that we're doing now, that we're practicing in a way that reflects screen relations. So we were being mediated through a screen, but we're still relating to each other. There's still a relationship being built and going on in various ways. And how we move and shift them in terms of our thinking, and not always disabuse ourselves of this notion that the online is something very different. It's a part of the world, and I noticed again in the evaluation that there was geography mentioned, and I was thinking that it's a beautiful example of connectography as they describe it now, where there are no geographic boundaries, where people are connected. And that's another piece I'm doing here in Cumbria, where there's 94% of the population who are connected, who have got access to the world through technologies, but there's 6% that we really need to address, and we're doing some work around that with 5G at the moment in a very rural location, similar to Ireland in terms of its rurality. There people can be cut off from this, so we also need to look at the infrastructure, and that's some other work that I've been involved in more recently. So where does that kind of coming towards the end of what I really wanted to share with you, and that's a real luxury to have that opportunity to do that, and a real reflection for me as a social worker, really. I think it was about 2-3 months into the pandemic, I was asked to write the opening chapter for a book about learning basically social work in the digital and COVID, reflecting on our experiences, and I wrote it from an academic point of view, and I was really reflecting on what I've shared with you today, kind of thing about, pre-pandemic, pandemic, post-pandemic as a framing. The fact is that, we were seeking various responses to what was unfamiliar circumstances to us all, and we were doing that in the context of, lack of technologies. There was all sorts of tensions that we experienced. But being social workers, we came to the fore, didn't we? And we rose to the challenge, because that's what we do. And I'm very proud that that's what we do. And we went into this pandemic state where we were really having to thrash out ideas about, using what platforms to be used, how to use them, how do they sit around GDPR compliance and all those various things. And I will, again, this is an open access chapter, and I can share it with you if people have any trouble accessing it. But basically where I am, my thinking now is I'm still looking at the technical side, digital capabilities, but moving more into kind of ethics and data protection, GDPR compliance, rights and responsibilities in that space. And again, the chapter lays that out, and you've very much taken that challenge on through this evaluation and your best practice guidance. It's an absolute credit piece of work. I do hope that people take the time to read it and read it in detail. It's a really interesting read. It allows us to begin to think about, where am I in my digital journey as a practitioner? Where am I? What are my digital capabilities and skills? What tools am I using for what purposes? And it really allows us to start that kind of individual reflection on how we go forward. And whilst the organisation that will provide training and things like that, there is something in terms of our professional regulations that we're thinking about. Where am I in my digital journey here in terms of me as a digital professional? So that's basically it from me. To say thank you very much for this opportunity to reflect with you, and well done on what is an absolutely fantastic piece of work, colleagues.
Well, can I say, Amanda, really well done to you. It's rare that I hear a keynote, and I'd like to hear it all again. And that's a genuine response. It was absolutely fascinating.
Thank you.
So really, really well done. I must say, I was really surprised that in 1987 we were thinking digital, because I wasn't long qualified then, and it hadn't entered my head, and I still remember, funny enough, just to say, I still remember the first email I got and thinking, oh my God, this is so intrusive, So it's interesting how you develop your understanding of, the value and purpose of technology. So thank you so much. And just to everyone listening here, this is being recorded on YouTube, and it will be available, for people to listen to again, because I just think I'm not the only one, Amanda, who'd like to hear that. So
thank you.
Yes, really impressive, really great thinking. And I love the energy and the positivity, and, so just to say, you will be coming back to our panel, which I'm really pleased about. So thank you. So it's now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Gráinne Hickey, and Gráinne is Barnardos Research and Evaluation Manager. And Gráinne's work in Barnardos is focused on providing high quality knowledge and evidence in relation to what works, particularly for vulnerable children and families, which we know is really important. And you've a lot of experience in evaluation and research, in applied research in community settings, and we're very lucky to have you in Barnardos. And over to you, Gráinne.
Oh, thanks for that, Suzanne, and thanks to Amanda as well for that really, really fascinating presentation. It's going to be a really hard act to follow. But my name is Gráinne Hickey. I'm the Research and Evaluation Manager in Barnardos, and I'm going to give you a very brief overview of the findings which emerged from our evaluation of digital interventions which were delivered during the COVID-19 pandemic. And this evaluation was conducted internally by our best practice team led by Claire Dunn, with contributions from Aoife Sinnott and Niamh McCarthy. And just very briefly to go into to set the background for this evaluation, as Amanda pointed out in her presentation there, digital technology is just such an increasing feature of our worlds and our healthcare systems, but social care has lagged behind that and remained less digitized than other systems. And traditional social care practice frequently involves physical proximity, listening and speaking to children, young people and their families, and that face-to-face interaction, often in the context of a service setting or home environment. But digital technology has been creeping into social care systems, and that process has just been greatly accelerated during COVID-19. And just to briefly, I suppose, to describe the experiences of Barnardos during this period, once lockdowns were imposed, there was really, really significant concerns about the vulnerable children and families that we work with. So there was a really rapid pivot during this time to ensure that the children and families that we work with throughout Ireland would continue to have access to really essential services to support their well-being and their safety and their welfare. So our COVID-19 response plan included access and delivering digital technologies, and this included telephone check-ins, video conferencing calls, and support delivering online interventions, either on a one-to-one basis or a group-based basis with children, parents and families throughout Ireland. And we also developed a number of web resources as well to support the well-being of children, parents and families during this period. So this was a really, really, rapid and disruptive change in the way that services and supports were delivered in Barnardos. So we conducted an evaluation to assess how this was going, how our services were faring, and to generate lessons for future delivery of this type of practice within Barnardos as well. So we explored our service users and our staff members' experiences of working together online during the pandemic. And in particular, our objectives were to assess the satisfaction and the engagement with digital interventions during this period. And we did this through online surveys with our service users, with our adult and parent service users, and with our staff members as well. We also wanted to hear the voices of children and young people who are engaged in our digital services. So we conducted one-to-one interviews with a small number of children and young people. And we also invited staff members to take part in focus groups in order to explore their experiences of working remotely during this very disruptive COVID-19 pandemic. So in all, we had 139 parents who took part in an online survey. So these were our service users who are accessing family support or some of our specialised services, such as our post-adoption services. They were typically aged between 25 and 44 years, although we did have a small proportion of slightly older participants as well. The 5 children took part in interviews. This included 3 boys and 2 girls who were aged between 11 and 16 years. And these children had received online one-to-one interventions during the COVID-19 pandemic, such as therapeutic support, play therapy, or relationship-focused work as well. Our staff members that took part included 102 staff members who completed our online survey, and a further 106 staff members also participated in focus groups. So all in all, we had, a very broad range of our Barnardos community members who took part, and we captured the experiences of both service users and staff members using a mixed methods evaluation. So just to give you a taste of some of the findings which have emerged from this evaluation, and starting with the experiences of service users. The participants who completed the survey had received a range of different digital interventions. So that included online one-to-one parenting support or family support work, practical family support, domestic violence focused interventions, group-based parenting support programs, and child welfare and protection work as well. So, and some families had also received more than one intervention. So there was a wide range of services which were delivered and received by service users. And what we found, what service users told us, was that their preferred form of engaging in digital intervention was through video conferencing, and particularly the use of Zoom. That was their preferred platform, and that was followed then by WhatsApp and phone calls. And really importantly, what came across in our survey findings was there was very high levels of satisfaction and enjoyment of digital interventions, with 90% of service users saying that they actually enjoyed participating in online interventions. And equally important, there was high levels of confidence engaging with digital and online platforms as well. 88% of service users felt at least somewhat confident accessing and engaging our online services. So we also allowed service users to provide us with some more detail around their experiences through some open-ended survey questions. And what we found here was both positives and negatives in terms of service users' responses to our digital interventions. For those who welcomed our digital interventions, they particularly tended to highlight the ease of access and the flexibility that was available to them through online interventions. And in particular, the removal of barriers, that they didn't need to travel to a particular service at a particular time, was experienced as a positive. This was seen as reducing stress and making services easier to access. And this was particularly beneficial as well for busy service users who were working full-time, who were looking after young children and taking care of their families. So it was particularly seen as a benefit that it gave them that flexibility, that choice around accessing services. What was also highlighted by these service users was that they were accessing services from an environment where they felt comfortable, from their home environment. And for them, they felt that this allowed them to open up and to say more about their needs and to express themselves in a way that they mightn't have been able to in a face-to-face setting. And this, this was particularly the case for those who were experiencing social anxiety or discomfort, or those who were neurodivergent as well. So for them, it reduced the stress that they might experience in a face-to-face environment. And they welcomed this choice and flexibility and increased accessibility available through digital interventions. We did, however, also find some negative or criticisms of digital services from some service users as well. And for some parents, what they found was when they were engaging in online digital interventions was that they didn't have a private, appropriate space where they could engage fully in digital intervention. So a lot of the time parents, didn't have anybody else to look after their children while they were attending sessions, and they didn't have that quiet space, that private space where they could fully engage and express their needs and benefit from services. So they felt they weren't able to open up and benefit. For children who took part in one-to-one interviews, what we found was that 2 out of the 5 indicated that they preferred digital interventions because they felt that they were more comfortable online, it reduced their anxiety, and they felt less that services, attending a physical service felt somewhat stigmatizing for them. So that because they didn't have to attend a service in person, they found it less stigmatizing. 3 out of the 5, however, felt that they would prefer to attend face-to-face services, and they found themselves feeling distracted while engaging online with their project worker, and they found the process to be less fun and a little bit more boring. Moving on then to the findings from our staff members, and bringing the findings from the survey and the focus groups together, what we found was, again, that service staff members welcomed the provision of digital and online services during the COVID-19 pandemic. The majority felt that they could work well online, and they were confident and comfortable delivering digital interventions. And during that COVID-19 period, digital interventions were really welcomed for maintaining connection and supporting vulnerable children and families during that crisis period. Routine aspects of work which were perceived as working well online and translating well into a digital sphere included the delivery of manualized parenting programs, in particular one-to-one parenting program or partnership with parents, and group-based parenting programs as well were perceived as working well online. There was also specific populations which were seen as benefiting from digital interventions, such as those who were experiencing anxiety, people with busy lives, working full time, with looking after families who would find it difficult to access services were also highlighted as benefit. And another group as well that were highlighted as welcoming digital interventions included separated parents, where they didn't need to come together in a face-to-face environment. It was seen as reducing discomfort engaging with services. So overall, digital interventions were praised for increasing access and flexibility and increasing reach across our services. Staff members did, however, also highlight challenges for service users and in their work and their collaborations with parents, children and families. And gaps in digital literacy were noted, particularly for older service users such as grandparent carers, who sometimes lacked that literacy or that experience and confidence in connecting online. Other groups were also, examples of parents who felt, and children who felt more self-conscious and uncomfortable online were also highlighted. And online fatigue during this period was also an issue, for young children who were accessing education remotely or parents who were working from home at this time as well, that an additional need to engage online was adding an additional stress to their lives, where they may have benefited more from an in-person social connection. But I suppose some of the standout challenges which emerged from the surveys and focus groups with staff members related to inadequate access to technology and Wi-Fi. And for service users were found that quite often they did have internet access via their mobile phones, but quite often they didn't have Wi-Fi connections, or they wouldn't have had access to a computer, laptop, or a tablet. And this sometimes resulted in poor connection or technological difficulties, which made communication and engagement difficult. So the connections may have been breaking down, and that disrupted conversation, disrupted the delivery of sessions with service users. And these were identified as barriers. And echoing then the findings from our service users as well, staff members also highlighted how service users sometimes were working, engaging from inappropriate or inadequate spaces. The absence of childcare for parents to be able, so that they could take that time out to engage in a digital session. Children sometimes having to engage in one-to-one sessions where their parent may also have been present in the room, and how that may have hindered how they express themselves and their needs, and whether there was that quiet space online available to service users as well was also highlighted as barriers for service users and challenges in delivering digital interventions. Our staff members also highlighted some professional challenges as well for themselves, and that related to difficulties developing and sustaining relationships online. And our staff members talked about how it was difficult to develop therapeutic alliance, particularly with new referrals during this period. And they felt it was harder to get to know what the needs for new service users were online, and to understand and express empathy for their challenges, and to communicate in an effective manner in an online sphere. So the type of social skills and the soft skills that they would usually use in face-to-face settings often didn't translate directly to an online sphere. So they needed to develop new skills, and this was quite a learning curve for staff members during this period. There was also concerns and raised around confidentiality, and particularly safeguarding when working online. So staff members talked about how when they were, dealing with difficult and sensitive issues where there was concerns about maybe domestic violence in the home or child welfare and protection concerns, that working online hinder their ability to make observations, to use all of their senses to get a true sense of what was happening in the home and make assessments. So that those kinds of decision-making processes were hindered and limited in an online setting. And this was very challenging for service users and for staff members. So just very, very quickly then to wrap up, our evaluation highlighted mixed findings and sometimes contradictory findings. There was both positive and negatives expressed in relation to the benefits and the challenges around digital social care interventions. And this really perhaps isn't unsurprising given the rapid shifts that were happening in this time, the disruption in social care services and in Barnardos, and as well, in general, in terms of our lives in this period, and the relative newness of these interventions for our community. So while positives, we saw really high levels of satisfaction and engagement, and there was also evidence there of kind of this experience fostering growing demand for online interventions or for hybrid interventions that can meet the needs of some service users. But there was also remaining uncertainty and fears and barriers. And some of those significant barriers related to continued inequities around access to information technology and Wi-Fi connections for disadvantaged and vulnerable families, and also for service providers as well. And that lack of appropriate space to engage in online supports, gaps in digital literacy, and those inequities around access to technology were seen as undermining the effectiveness and the reach of online interventions. And that really does need to be addressed if we're going to capitalise on the potential that digital technologies offer. And training and resource needs for staff members and social care practitioners were also identified, and they related to the development of new and creative soft skills for engaging with service users online, as well as providing resources to guide decision-making around whether digital interventions are appropriate and how they can be implemented for different families with a range of different needs. And that's really, I suppose, where the Barnardos digital best practice framework comes in. And Siobhan will talk more about that framework in the next presentation. So just before I hand you back to Suzanne, I'd just like to thank all of the service users, the children, the young people and the parents who took part in this evaluation, and our staff members as well for their contribution. And to congratulate the best practice team, Claire, Laura and Aoife and Neve, for their work in this area during a very difficult and busy time. And if you want to find out more about this evaluation, you can download the report from our website. You can also find the findings are available as a preprint from Journal of Medical Internet Research preprints, or you could email research@barnardos.ie if you would like to find out any more information.
Thanks very much, Grania. I first want to say I'm really delighted that this is going to be available in the literature as well. So it means we're really contributing to the growing body of evidence and research in this area, which I think is crucial, because it's not without its complexities, I think, as the evaluation has highlighted. And I'm sure others may contact you to maybe ask a few more questions. I know you'd be very happy to respond to anything that people may want to ask you of in relation to the evaluation. So thank you very, very much for that. And it's now my pleasure to introduce Siobhan Green, who I've worked with for 20 years. So I know Siobhan very well. It's been my real pleasure to work with her. Siobhan is now the Director of Children's Services. She has had many roles in Barnardos, from direct practice project leader to service design to ensuring quality standards, and always throughout it's all about children's needs and ensuring that they get the best service possible in order to have fantastic futures. And she's a real valued colleague. And I'm really looking forward now, Siobhan, to listening to your presentation in relation to the practice framework that we developed following the evaluation. So over to you.
Oh, thanks, Suzanne. That's a lovely introduction. So it's a pleasure to be here this afternoon to talk to you about our digital best practice framework. I was really struck by what Amanda said about us all needing to stop now and reflect on where we are in our digital journey. And I hope that this digital best practice framework will be something that would be useful to you all in doing that. We pivoted during COVID, like the rest of the world, to introducing this blended approach. And, we made huge changes in our service delivery models without the time to think or plan it in the way that we would normally do things. So that immediate innovation without kind of having a chance to explore the best practice aspects to it. This project, the evaluation and now the digital practice framework, has allowed us to really do that and stop and think. So we're hoping that this will be something that'll be useful both in Barnardos and beyond in terms of thinking about what how we sorry, I'm just trying to move the slide on, how we work and engage with people digitally. So, sorry, my slide has moved too more. Sorry, my slides are playing up on me. So the digital, what are the outcomes? Why do we have the digital practice framework? I suppose the main reason for it is that we want to now keep online as part of our toolbox, as Amanda called it, in terms of service delivery options. In the same way that we don't think twice about picking up the phone to a parent, that we kind of have this as a way of working. But we want to make sure that when we're doing that, it is of equivalent quality of our face-to-face work. And the way we believe we do that, having gone through this exercise, is about having a mutually agreed focus with parents and children, and that we've staff who are confident and have the knowledge and skills to be able to do this work effectively. So in the framework, you'll find 6 guiding principles. They're tiny on the screen now. I don't expect you to be able to read them, but I'm going to go through them each now in a second. I suppose the purpose of these guiding principles is to make sure that our working online is safe, that it's kind of meaningful, and that it's of high quality for children and families. So the first of these is that we want our online service delivery to be led by service user needs, preferences, and making sure that they have the resources. So children and families should be at the center of our decision making as to whether or not we want to work online, whether it's going to work. So what are service users' preferences? What are their needs? Like, what suits them best? For some of our families, maybe they didn't even know what it might look like. So maybe giving them a little taster session to see how it might work, so that they understand and are making informed choices about whether or not they'd like to receive services online, or face-to-face. And what we're finding is that it's not as linear as that of online or face-to-face, that it's kind of a bit of blended of both, so that there are maybe aspects of our service that we're doing face-to-face and aspects that we're continuing to do online, like maybe checking in at the end of the later in the week to see how a new routine is going or something like that in the family home. Whereas in some of our therapeutic services, like our adoption services or bereavement, we're able to offer the service in totality online. So really kind of thinking about what's what's going to work for this child and family and the type of service that we're offering. The second principle is all around what are the barriers. So one of the barriers for children and families to access those online services, and what can we do to remove those barriers? So for many of the families we were working with during COVID, there were barriers that Amanda's touched on, things like not having access to a device, not having access to the internet, maybe financial challenges in terms of maybe caps on internet data caps on their internet plans. Maybe they didn't have the right environment for it. So for every child and family, there will be different barriers that present, and it's our job as workers to try to creatively overcome those and support families. And sometimes that involves some financial support in order for that to happen effectively. The third principle is around making sure that staff are supported to provide quality services online. So we put a lot of attention in terms of developing a digital series of digital webinars to support staff to be able to understand how to best move services online. So how to work therapeutically online, how to work online safely. And also we found that staff needed a lot of practical tips around using all the different online platforms. That could be quite bamboozling as to am I in Zoom now or am I in Teams now, and what's the different way around each of them. So offering that kind of support to staff so they feel equipped to be able to provide quality services online. This therapeutic relationship is principle 4, and that's about the therapeutic relationship remaining at the center of online service delivery. And I think Amanda touched on this in terms of our kind of hypothesis of how we develop relationships with families. And we've very much found that normal relationship building skills still apply online. We just need to plan and think a little bit differently to make it work. So sometimes we just need to be a little bit more creative, and we also need to make sure that we prepare a little bit more. So if we're going to do a session with a parent online or a child online, we might need to make sure they have something in their house, a booklet or something that they'll need for the session to make sure that it's effective for them. The other thing we've found is that we need to be really creative in terms of how we engage children, particularly in online working. So it might be having X's and O's on the whiteboard of Zoom before you start a game with the kids, or it might be getting a child to share their favorite piece of music. So whatever it is, some way to develop that kind of relationship that we work hard to develop in face-to-face work, that we need to do the same in the online world. The fifth principle is around the online spaces, making sure that they're safe for services, users and staff. And here we're thinking about all the different risks that might exist. Some things might be risks in relation to confidentiality. I know Amanda touched on some of these things in terms of the risk assessment that we need to do. Some of the environments for both our staff and our service users. Are there things in the environment that are not safe? Are there interruptions going to happen? Do families and staff have a quiet space? What's the focus of our work and the level of risk? We found, particularly during COVID, where we were working with families where there were high-end child welfare and child protection issues, that online working on its own was not sufficient in terms of making sure that children were safe. So making sure that we're kind of aware of what's our role in this family, what are we trying to achieve, and is online the right mechanism to do that, or partially do that. And the sixth principle is around making sure that the work is planned and outcomes focused. So really thinking about our professional skills and creativity, and how do we make sure that the work online is structured, planned and focused in the same way that we do in the face-to-face space. So in the framework, you'll see there are 6 sections, and each section kind of breaks down a little guidance in relation to reflecting for you as a practitioner, planning your session firstly. So thinking about, are you ready? What documents do you need? The service user preference, what do they need? Is there any IT or cybersecurity issues that you might need to think about? Do you need to do a practice run? Are you feeling a bit nervous about it? Is there a colleague who's experienced that you can talk to about it? Is there any problems you might have in terms of accessing the internet or accessing a device, and the same for parents? So really stopping and thinking about all the different things you need to be prepared to make sure that the session is as successful as it can be. The second section in the framework takes you through safeguarding and managing risk. So here you're thinking about, a bit like I was talking about earlier, what's the purpose of the work? Is online a suitable method for it, or totally online? Are there issues around privacy, confidentiality? We as workers need to be extra alert and attuned in the online space. How is the service user presenting? Do they appear worried? Are they stressed? Are they engaging less than normal or better than normal? Is there anything in the environment that they need to be concerned about? So all the time thinking, being alert during the session and reflecting after the session in relation to if there's any kind of concerns, in the same way that we would have after a visit to a family home. The third section thinks about fidelity. So here, this is thinking about not changing the core activities of the program to make sure that you're still doing the program in the way that you should. So the number of sessions, the focus of the sessions, but thinking about what are the creative adaptations you need to make to be able to offer it in an online setting rather than in the face-to-face world that it may have been designed for. The fourth section thinks about delivering your online session. So here you're thinking about user needs again, and understanding things about your environment and the service user's environment. Paying particular attention to how you might open the session. So how do you give a warm welcome? Maybe asking some general questions to establish the mood, but equally pay attention to the closing part of the session. In face-to-face world, we'd never just let a parent get up and leave the chair and walk out of the room. We'd go out with them, see them out of the building. So it's the same thing. How do you have that virtual wind down to make sure that the parent is supported and okay leaving, and do we need to connect them in with somebody if there's an outstanding issue or they're feeling quite stressed about something, for example. The fifth was building that therapeutic relationship. So I've talked a lot about this earlier, and Amanda's talking about this too, and I think that it's about how do we do that online. So paying attention to our eye contact, making sure that we're engaging, the actively listening to people, paraphrasing back to them what they're saying so they're aware that we are listening to them, being really aware of ourselves and how we are online, that we're not drifting off into space, that we're very much present and alert and attuned to them, and being creative with them, all the time to make sure that we're trying to build that rapport and relationship in every step of our interaction with them. The last section of the framework thinks about evaluation and reflection. Sorry, slide, apologies. And in this, we're thinking about a number of different sections. I suppose we have found that to reflect afterwards, after each session, is really important in terms of developing our practice further. So in terms of the environment, we're thinking about things like, was it inviting? Was it relaxing? Was I close enough to my camera? Was my eye level okay? Could you see my face? How's my volume? Could the service user hear me? Could I hear them? So all of those things in terms of the environment. Is there anything there that I would change, or what would I make sure that I would do again the next time that worked really well? In terms of preparing, you're thinking about, was I absolutely prepared? Was the service user prepared? Did we both have the material that we needed to be able to engage in the session properly? In terms of session structure, that's thinking about things like, was there enough activities, or did I try to do too much in that session? Did I cover all my goals? Did I have enough time, or did I run short in time? What would I change in the next session? In terms of relationship, did I build rapport? How's my body language? Did I demonstrate good listening? The things that we talked about earlier, did we do those things well? In terms of technology, did we have any technical challenges? What were the things that maybe blocked or were challenges for us, but also what were the things that enabled it well? So this type of platform worked particularly well with this parent. This type of platform proved difficult, so we might not use that again. And in terms of outcomes, we're thinking about service users' view of experience. So how did they find it? But also, did they believe that it helped achieve some outcomes? And also thinking back to what was your specific program that you were offering, and did it achieve the program outcomes that were listed there? So on the last slide here, you can just see a screenshot of what our digital practice framework looks like. As I said, I really hope it is something that will help to support both your planning, your doing, and your reviewing of online working. And in it, you'll also find some, I think, useful information sheets and tip sheets that can be shared with parents and children, so that there'll be a lot of resources for you there, as well as kind of some information that can help to guide you as a practitioner and thinking about how you best engage children and families to make sure that your online working is effective and safe and meaningful. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Siobhan. And actually, interesting enough, just listening to you now, one of the things that struck me as well is that we also see ourselves online as we're doing the work. So in a sense, we're getting that feedback in relation to how we are, and if we happen to be those people who have a particular expression that's very warm and engaging, that's one thing, or we might find that we are cooler than we thought we were being. So it's interesting to get that opportunity then. And the other thing that struck me as well is that there's also opportunity for practice development, because if the parent or child gives permission, it can be recorded, and then a supervisor can listen back, and there can be a learning tool as well. So that's another possibility. Anyway, thank you very, very much. Siobhan's going to join our panel later. And it's now my pleasure to give you a chance to really literally listen to children's voices where they tell us what they thought about online working, what worked and what didn't work for them. So I think Sarah will now play that video.
Online because it was easier and it was faster than making the meetings in real life, because you could make up the time and the day if I was at home or if I was in school. It was just easier.
My favourite way to meet or talk to you is being face to face, because I feel like we can have a better conversation. I like the way that we can play games and to actually have a proper conversation.
I liked both, but I preferred coming in to see Claire face to face.
My favourite way to meet is online, because I didn't have to drive up. I prefer Zoom over face to face due to it being a lot more convenient on my behalf. I suppose it's just getting to do it from your own home. You can do whatever you want with your day.
I liked talking with video because it was easier, and like you can say more things that you want to than you can in real life.
What I liked on meeting online was being in my pyjamas and being all cuddled up on the couch.
We can play games and have biggies.
I just liked being online because I feel like I was looking away from the screen and getting distracted all the time and started yawning.
I would give 5 stars.
I would give it a 5.
Probably a 1 star because I preferred being face to face.
I'd give it a 0 or -1.
I would give it 2.5 stars, like in the middle.
Because when I'm giving 5 stars, the fellow that I was working with is nice and he helps me get rid of my stress faster, and he gave me a tip that when I'm angry I just need to put down one of my fingers and count how long I need to keep them down and then put them back up, and that helped me get my stress out of my body when I was angry.
I think that something that could be better if we were working online would be probably with some other kids from Barnardos while being online. I think it would be better.
And I did a quiz with him online and I won both of them because he gave me easy questions.
Okay.
The option to do the video calls and
at a time when
it was comfortable and I wasn't doing school, so it was easier than having to come home and then go to eating dairy again.
So what a difference, -1 to 5. So real, variety of perspectives there from children. And it's lovely just hearing their voices and their different accents and the pictures they gave us, of being in a pajamas versus, playing games. And it was just fantastic. And now we're going to hear what parents thought. And we're doing this through 2 project workers from Barnardos, Sarah and Lauren, who feedback what parents want to convey. The parents themselves didn't want to appear on camera. Okay, so Sarah will now play this video.
Hi everybody, my name is Lauren. I'm a project worker on the Barnardos Best Practice team, and I'm here today with my colleague Sarah.
Hi everyone, I am a project worker on the Adult Post-Adoption Service.
So prior to today's webinar, we spoke with a couple of parents from Barnardos Post-Adoption Service who told us a bit about their experiences of working online together with Barnardos. So today, Sarah is kindly going to give us some of that feedback on behalf of the parents, and I'm going to launch into some of the questions that we asked. So I suppose firstly, we had asked parents about how long they had attended Barnardos services for, and in what ways they had attended. So, for example, if that was always online or if it was a mixture of in-person and online meetings.
So one parent that we spoke to has been attending Barnardos since the end of 2018. They have been attending both online and in person. So they have done one-to-one meetings and workshops online, and one workshop in person. And another parent that we spoke to began attending just in May gone past in 2022. So they have had meetings over the phone, and then after a couple of months, they moved to online video calls so that they could attend along with their partner.
Okay, great. So it sounds like both parents are choosing to meet online at the moment. Did the parents give us any information about what platforms they use to meet online?
Yeah, they did. So the first parent had been using Zoom initially to meet with Barnardos, as well as speaking on the phone. And then they also email back and forth if they need guidance around anything specific or to arrange meetings. And then the second parent that we spoke to used Zoom in the beginning, and then they transitioned to Microsoft Teams. So the only issue that they had with any of these platforms was their first scheduled call on Zoom, there was a power cut, so it couldn't go ahead. So they moved to a telephone consultation instead.
Okay. And did they talk about, I suppose there's a couple of different platforms there that the parents spoke about. Did they feel confident initially using Zoom, Teams, things like that?
Yeah, the first parent said that they work remotely for their job every day, so they're very confident using online tools. And then the second parent also agreed, their partner works remotely, so they had no problem using the apps.
Great. I know that we also asked parents about what they liked overall about working online. Would you be able to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the first parent that we spoke to had told us that using online is vastly more convenient for them.
Okay. And did they tell us why, I suppose, or anything about it being more convenient?
Yeah, so they said that their job is flexible. So it suits them to take an hour from their working day to do an online meeting. But if they had to meet in person, they would need 2 hours because they would have to drive to the city and find parking and all of that. So it's much more manageable to do the 1 hour online. So they said everything online has been vastly more positive for them. And then the second parent also said similar. There's a large distance between where they live and the closest Barnardos office. So actually attending online has made it possible for them. And then their partner also works remotely and is flexible, so can take an hour off during the day as well to attend.
Okay, yeah, that's really positive. I'm really hearing how that could be more convenient for some people, and it allows for more flexibility as well. Were there any challenges that the parents brought up?
I suppose parent one who has attended workshops with other parents had advised their feeling was that you missed some natural connections when you're meeting other parents online.
Okay. Did they tell us anything about maybe what those natural connections might be?
Yeah, so they had kind of said, grabbing a cup of tea and a biscuit and having a chat flowed a bit more naturally. They did say that going to workshops online are not terrible, but not quite as good. They did appreciate that there are breakout rooms set up so that you can chat with other parents. But they did say that they are doing one-to-one work online, and they find that it's a 5-star service.
Okay. And did the second parent, did they talk about any challenges?
Yeah, I suppose they felt that the main challenge was that they felt a little bit vulnerable moving from telephone calls and then over to video calls. They felt they had a bit more anonymity on the phone, like they had something to hide behind. But they also advised that the service has been fantastic and they feel that it should be promoted more and that they regret not having rung sooner.
Okay, yeah. I think it's something maybe we all have had to get used to. If we're working online, seeing ourselves on camera can be something that can be, challenging as well. So thanks for that feedback, Sarah. I suppose lastly, I'm wondering if the parents had any advice for other parents or families who might be considering online work with Barnardos.
Yeah, so the first parent we spoke to had advised other parents not to be afraid to do online, that it can potentially be more convenient both for them and for Barnardos staff. They did say if you haven't used certain types of technology before, there may be teething problems, but that you can work through them. They advised to get a mic, which makes the sound quality better, to check broadband connections, as you know, if it's not good, you might have to turn your camera off for some meetings. And they also felt that if you have a poor connection and you need to discuss something sensitive, it might be better to arrange to do this over the phone.
Okay.
And the second parent that we spoke to recommended working online with Barnardos. They would advise other parents to have a notebook at hand to jot things down, and also to have a backup plan for if you're not able to get onto your computer. So they, for example, have the Microsoft Teams app on their phone in case something happens.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Sarah. Some really kind of practical advice there for other parents too who might be thinking about engaging in some online work as well. I suppose I just want to say thanks to Sarah for giving us that feedback today, and thank you to the parents who agreed to share their experience with us as well. I'll hand you back over to Suzanne.
So thanks very much. I think all the thank yous have been said, so I don't need to send them or say them again. So I'm just going to go straight on to our panel, and I'm delighted to welcome back onto the video. I don't know whether you call it the stage in this context, Siobhan and Amanda, and actually two panel members who are going to start by giving their reflections in relation to what they've heard. And as soon as they come on the screen, I will introduce them. Oh, good to see you both there. I thought you hadn't disappeared, which is fantastic. My pleasure first to introduce Dr. Carmen Keeley. So Carmen, maybe you can wave. People don't know which I'm talking about, which is great. And Carmen holds a doctorate in sociology and is now working as a researcher in the School of Education at the University of Galway. And Carmen's research interests are parenting, migration, the investigation of inequality. These are all very important issues. And we're also then going to be joined by, we have already been joined by Maeve Coleman, and Maeve is, now it's a very interesting name actually, you're founder and director of Docent training. It's a training organisation, particularly focusing on digital skills. And I know that you've won awards in relation to continuous professional development in that context. So obviously this is an area that really speaks to you, and it's a much needed area in terms of skills and skill development. So I'm going to start off with asking Carmen to share some of her thoughts and reflections, which will be followed by Maeve, and then we'll see what interesting question we might quickly talk about as a panel as a whole. So over to you, Carmen.
Yeah. Thanks a million. First of all, pleasure to be part of this today, and congratulations on a really good evaluation and the best practice framework. So it's really something useful, and I hope that practitioners will use it. So why I'm very interested in this is I was part of a 2-year study that was funded by the Health Research Board and the Irish Research Council, and we looked at crisis coping, marginalized young people's experience of living and learning during COVID-19. So we would have looked at a lot of young people that would have probably been involved in services with you guys. So we kind of collected a bit of data on what young people were saying, how they were coping during COVID-19. And surprisingly, a lot of the young people didn't do too bad at all. They enjoyed the online learning, and a lot of the young people actually felt more open and less social pressure by being able to communicate digitally, which is quite good, So we've taken the positives out of, the crisis. But like Amanda said, and this struck strongly with me, is that we were all in a learning curve. So obviously there was no smooth sailing for anyone, and there was a lot of expectations on professionals to be delivering straight away without actually having the essential tools that they needed. So we had to all come up with plans on, how to do this. So I really enjoyed this new best practice framework, and I'm really looking forward to how you're gonna, continue developing this and how this will help practitioners to deliver both face-to-face and online. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Carmen. And now over to Maeve.
Look, I did the classic. I was on mute. It's a classic pandemic move there. Thanks so much for having me, and congratulations on a wonderful evaluation. I noted that many of the speakers spoke about the connection, and this is an inherent part of our work at Docent. Docent means 2 cents, and it's an Irish name, but we deliver award-winning CPD accredited training and e-learning. And this time last year, I was sitting with lots of Barnardos staff, training them on virtual communication. And it's just wonderful to see the strategic and integrated approach to the best practice framework, and the reason being that many organizations are not doing this, and this is what people feel every day, and why the feedback is so good from you, because you're focusing on reflection, you're focusing on improvement, and the best connection for the best time, and for the best medium, for the best experience for your users, for your kids and families. And that's the most important thing of all. That connection can never be lost when you're doing all of those things. And I think that very clearly from when Amanda mentioned this concept of technology to support humanity, my own philosophy about technology not being a replacement, it's not a bolt-on or an add-on, it's a completely different thing that you have to see the joy and use for its benefits in and of itself, rather than thinking that you have to change your face-to-face into online. You have to make it online. And I think that's something that really that journey came about. And I noticed echoes of that in terms of Gráinne's overview of the research, and Sarah and Lauren's experiential approach as well. So I'm so delighted to see this. I met Claire done a few years back as keynote speakers for a Rethink Ireland seminar, and we've developed that training and all sorts of virtual communications developments for Barnardos, and it's just fantastic to see. So congratulations and well done, and I will really await the question for the panel next.
Yeah, well, listen, thank you very much. And actually, one of the things that strikes me at this event is we can't see the people who are listening. We can't engage with them, and we can't share our warmth and our interests and get their warmth and interest, or maybe some of their critiques back. So that to me is something that isn't here today. So just thinking, bearing in mind our time, because I also know that one of the things I take from being online is that being online too much, people need a break. So I don't want to go over our time too much, but bearing in mind that in the spirit of engagement, we want to engage with our audience. Is there anything any of you would like to say from your perspective that you think would be something that the people who are listening could take away with them in terms of their own practice? And I'm going to start actually with you, Amanda, if that's okay, and then I'll go with our 2 panelists that haven't had the opportunity to do their own presentations, and I'll finish with you, Siobhan, if that's okay. So just you all have a bit of warning. So Amanda, what would you like to say to our listeners now today?
A couple of things, quotes from research, and one is going back to the 1970s and my Hasidic colleagues who started this research trajectory, really, where they say, be the master and not the slave to technologies. That's one key thing, and I think well done for demonstrating that in lots of different ways through this work. And the other thing to say is that we as humans haven't really changed, and the world hasn't not really changed, because what Dana Boyd said in her research about teenagers and how they navigate the online and how they own that space, this is about 2010, that the internet has illuminated the good, the bad, and the ugly of everyday life. So it's just things that, I obviously love the literature in this space, and I would encourage people to engage with that literature. And if there's any of it that you need or want or can't access, always knock my screen. I feel like I've really, whilst I can't see you or whatever, I feel that I've got a connection with a whole new group of colleagues, and I feel that's a real luxury for me today. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And as you said, the good, the bad, and the ugly, I'm thinking of that Clint Eastwood, that Western. I'm hearing the music in the background. So thanks very much for this. So yes, Carmen, what would you like to say to our audience and listeners? Oh, well, unfortunately, I have to say the dreaded word.
Mute, sorry. Like, and to add to what Amanda said when she started out, we are living in an evolving social world. And I think that not to replace the social face-to-face interaction, I think we can't do that because we are social beings and we need to have face-to-face interaction. But we should embrace, the digital development and technology and just take it on board. It doesn't have to replace the face-to-face interaction, but it should be part of something that we just take on board.
Thank you very much. And now Maeve.
Thanks so much. The one thing that I would like to say about the whole thing is it's part of our evolution, and the technology enhanced communication will become more a part of our everyday lives. And I know a lot of people mark the pandemic at the point at which they first engaged with it, but all of this was happening anyway as a social change, as a social evolution, as a big, massive mega trend. The pandemic made it faster. So the pandemic had an awful bad rap and was like, let's blame the pandemic for having to go online. But just remember, probably anyone under 25 that you know won't make a phone call to you. They will not. And that change is about to become more and bigger and faster and permeate through our online and virtual communication. So have fun with it. And, you can release the joy of it if you use it for what it is. So that's my main message and takeaway points.
Okay, can I say thank you very much for that? And I have to say, I hadn't thought of joy in relation to technology until this event. So thank you for giving me that learning. I really appreciate that, and the recognition that we are evolving in this way. So Siobhan, over to you now to finish us off.
I think I just reiterate what others said, that the practice landscape is always evolving. I really love the comparison that Amanda said earlier around the telephone and how that was a radical transformation once. And we all know that that's not so radical in any of our worlds now. So if we can take that comparison and not be afraid of technology, I think that would be my kind of advice to people, is to give it a go and try it. I think COVID forced us to do it and not to retreat back to face and lose all of the benefits of potential digital working. And I think my word of the day is that connectography, if I've said that right, Amanda. I've never heard that before, but I love
Connect instead of geography, it's connectography.
Connectography. I love that, because I just think that to me sums up the potential of this in terms of dissolving our normal geographic boundaries. And for me, that's exciting. So that's what I'll kind of take away as a new word today. So thank you all. It was great to be here today.
Okay, well, thanks to all the panelists. It was very short and sweet, but I do realise that we need to finish roughly on time. I want to thank all of you who are listening for your attention. I want to thank all the panelists who brought such vitality to this issue, and I think it was such an engaging, context in which to think about what are important issues that are part of our evolution. Obviously, to thank the parents and children and Barnardos staff who participated in the evaluation, to thank again our funder Rethink Ireland, and to thank our fab comms team in the background being calm and patient with technology and us. Thank you very much. And lastly, very much to all of you for listening, and take care. Goodbye.